So today's webinar, we're going to look and talk about case studies. So we'll look at where is Cove Lighting used, okay, and really kind of look at that in some level of depth. And we'll look at the basics of Cove Lights, okay. I think it's really, really important that in this webinar that we just talk about some design basics that we should bear in mind. We're going into detail of some of the case studies as well, and also really touch on some design and application tips, so that you going away from this, hopefully that's going to help you in terms of the design and specification of luminaires, but also the architectural detail, which is really, really important here. So a cove, let's look at the definition first and foremost. From an architectural point of view, a cove is a concave arch. It's an arch molding, especially one formed at the junction of a wall with a ceiling. So what we're talking about here is an architectural detail, and what we're looking to do is to provide a wash of light upon the vertical or the horizontal, and it's an integrated detail. Okay, let's just go through that in a little bit of detail. So where is it used? But most importantly, what does it look like? You know, a cove is used in all market sectors. Okay, it's not just used to provide a nice cozy level of light in a hospitality space. It's used in commercial environments, for meeting rooms, for receptions, in retail, inside, but also you know, within retail units, but also in retail malls as well. Yes, it's used in residential, and of course in bars and restaurants. You know, when we look at a hotel and we look at that hospitality environment, a cove can be used to frame a space. It can be used to uplight, to bring out some detail. You know, the whole point of a cove is that it's a low glare solution. It's an integrated solution. I think one of the key messages this morning is that it's about coordination. It's about working with your contractors, working with the architect and with the specifier. This is a collaboration, this architectural detail. In a residential environment, it's used to provide a graze, a wash of light. Within a restaurant and a bar, maybe it's used to frame a space or to pick out a personal environment. Within a retail, yes, it's used in retail units and within malls as well. And I'll come on to some of these projects in a little while in a bit more detail. Within a commercial environment, reception areas, into meeting rooms, even into corridors as well, a cove can really help to define that space. So let's look at a couple of typical cove details to start to think about design considerations. What would I recommend for you to start to think about? So let's start with your typical cove layout, your typical cove detail. So here you can see, and hopefully you can see, just a generic detail. And what we're going to incorporate into this is a very simple linear luminaire. That linear luminaire has a diffuser on the front, it has a wide beam, and it's providing a wash of light onto that vertical. And on this occasion, you've got a remote driver, so think about where that remote driver is going to go, okay? And we need to now start to think about the detail. The point really is that you should be able to see the lit effect, you're not going to see the luminaire. So let's now start to think about and put people in context of this environment. When we think about the context, and as I've just been going through, when we think about where that cove is being used, whether it's a retail, whether it's residential, whether it's commercial, you need to think about the people, okay? Think about the people that are using that environment. So here on the right-hand side, I've shown two dashed lines, okay? Let's try and keep this really simple. Number one is the viewpoint, and the second is the cutoff angle. So that viewpoint is all about making sure that the luminaire is in a position whereby it's providing the right and the desired lit effect, but you're not seeing the light source, you're not seeing the luminaire, okay? And the second element is the cutoff angle. And by that I mean, what we want to make sure with this lit effect is that it's a soft drop-off. There aren't any big dramatic cutoff angles. And we can alleviate that by providing a diffused lens on the front of the luminaire. That doesn't mean we're cutting out all of the light. It can still have a high luminaire lumens per watt package. So it's about efficiency, but it's about making sure that we're creating that indirect, diffused lit effect upon the vertical. Yes, or the horizontal, and we'll come on to those examples a bit later. What I would also recommend is that we start to think about finishes now as well, okay? So we need to think about that in the best way of really getting the best lit effect across is to look at having a matte finish to the internal surfaces of your cove. Okay, if you've got a reflective finish, and I'll come on to a couple of images in a little while, you're going to start to see an image of the light source, maybe of the LEDs, which is something you really don't want. And what we're now finding is that that cove space is being squeezed all the time. So you may need to specify a luminaire that can tilt, maybe by 30 to 30 degrees, just so that you're getting the light out onto the vertical or the horizontal, so that you're making sure you're making the best lit effect possible, and the light isn't being wasted within that cove detail, just going down. And I'll come on to that in a little while. The second variant is very different. It's a direct cove. And this is really where we're looking to incorporate maybe a point source or a linear source up within your cove detail. And again, maybe we're tilting it by 10 degrees just so that we're grazing down that vertical. And again, if we're thinking about grazing, this is really because maybe there's a texture. It could be because of the material. It could be concrete, it could be wood, it could be some other textured paneling. And by grazing it, we're really bringing out the drama, the context of that space. Okay, so by grazing down, we're creating more contrast. We're creating more of that wow factor. Okay, so again, think about the viewpoint. This point source or linear source should be up and out of the way so that it's the lit effect that we're benefiting from here wherever possible. So this lit effect can be provided by a point source, or it can be provided by a linear source. The difference between the diffused and the direct: the diffused has a very wide beam with a diffused lens. Your direct has a point source and therefore has an optic. So you're grazing down to create a great deal of drama. One thing I would really just consider is, what do you want this to look like? Okay, so when I talked there about reflexes and finishes of the materials that you're working with, get an understanding of the context where your project is. So what we're trying to make sure is that the lit effect goes right into the corner, that it's a diffused lit effect, that it's going to be there for the long term, that there aren't shadow gaps between luminaires. In the old days, well, I say old, not that long ago now, where we used to overlap linear fluorescence by 80 mil or 100 mil on a diagonal so that we got that consistent lit effect. But now with LEDs, we can get that detail a lot smaller, we can get the LEDs into the corner, we can get a far better lit effect using that LED solution. So think about the continuous lit effect, think about the reflectance and the reflectances of your surfaces, and make sure you have an understanding of those projects. So when we start to think about a cove in context, a cove is one of a number of layers of light that we can use within a scheme, okay? And it's about how we create that balance. And we're modeling that space. We're creating scenes of light, daytime into nighttime scenes. And the cove is one of them. When you look at this bar that was recently completed in Dubai that acdc was involved with, you've got the decorative chandelier, you've got integrated light at the bottom of the bar, you've got huge chandelier features, you've got a cove, you've got downlights. So it's a balance between these layers as to how they work and how you create that identity, how you create that experience. And the cove is fundamental to the lit effect, the appearance of that space, the identity of that space. In direct contrast, you can look at this. This is into Victoria Centre in Nottingham that acdc were recently involved with. So that's using a product called the Arel Pro. The point here really is about cove lighting, integrated light, seamless integration, okay? So we're getting light right into the corner. There are no shadow gaps between the luminaires. We're grazing the light up and onto the ceiling. But I think my main point here that I would emphasize is about the color binning, the color consistency, the consistency of the lit effect. It is so important within this retail mall, within this environment, that there is a consistency from one LED to the next, from one luminaire to the next, so that these coves are consistent. This is about a public realm space. We want it to look, to feel incredible. The designer Hawley was involved, in terms of the specification. That consistency is very, very important. So when you're specifying your luminaire, think about color binning, think about two-step macadam, so that you're getting that consistency from one cove to the next, from one luminaire to the next, from one LED to the next. It's absolutely critical for the success, the look, the feel of this environment. So why do we use a cove? What does it do? Let's just take a little step back here and just think about why, okay? So we use a cove to frame. It defines the perimeter of a room, it accentuates a feature. So on the left-hand side, you've got a commercial environment where you've got three very different coves. You've got one at the back, grazing or providing a perimeter level of cove lights. You then have a slot, and then you've got a cove uplighting the center of that space. And it's balanced and it's working with those downlights to provide a direct lit effect. And then on the right-hand side, you've got this bar. You've got the cove and the integrated light below. You're framing that environment. It's so important. And then you can graze. You can either graze going up to accentuate the look, the feel, the texture, or obviously we can graze down the vertical as well. One of the advantages here in this example is that we're using that light to provide a reflected level of light to the space below. So then we've got no downlights. So it's about integrated lights, and where there is lighting, it's more decorative. There's more about their personality, the presence, the look, the feel of that space. Lights can always and also be used to direct, to help in terms of orientation and direction. So within a corridor environment, we can start to incorporate a cove to provide a level of direction, either by breaking up the ceiling on the left-hand side and shaping that space and defining our route all the way through, or on the right-hand side, incorporating a slot cove, where you've got that reflected light, and both areas are benefiting from that reflected level of light. And that moves us on to the next point here, which, the cove is about providing a low ambient level of light as well. So we can dim it, we can control it, we can use that reflected, diffused light to provide a low ambient level of light as well. That's really, really important. So whether it's a hospitality environment all the way through to a corridor, a cove can help to provide a low ambient level of light as well. And then it can also help to create height. My main point here that I would really put forward is that we're now being squeezed. So mechanical and electrical services here in these projects have been carefully planned so they're around the perimeter of the room. And that's enabled the cove to be in the middle of the room so that we're uplighting the center of this space. And that really helps to create height within a low height space, okay? So uplighting that ceiling helps us to create height, but it's one of those layers of light working together within this space. A cove also helps to model. So here you've got an example of a food court in a shopping mall where this is all about reflected light. Yes, there's direct light, but it's about reflected light, diffused light. So it's helping people be modeled, their face, their bodies, when they're sat, when they're talking to their friends, we're modeling their face so that it's really clear. The colors are really coming through as well. So that doesn't just go for food courts. Yes, it's about changing rooms, toilets as well. It's about creating the mood and the identity of that space. Yes, a cove can also be used for architectural lighting. This could be single color, it can be dynamic. So we're grazing up and we're picking out the architecture of a space. Again, it's about identity, it's about experience, but it's about also providing that wow factor within this environment here. But remember, it's about seeing the light, not the luminaire. So a cove completes a scheme. A cove is used with downlights, with decorative, and it really helps to be one of those layers of light to really define the look, the feel, our emotional connection with a space, whatever that space is. So let's now go into a little bit more detail. Let's go into 5 typical details. So I've talked a little bit already about that typical perimeter cove. We've got the graze cove as well. 3 is an uplighting cove, which I've mentioned, slot cove, and then the last and final one is a vertical cove. Let's just go into those. They're a typical cove. I've talked about this already. Think about dimensions. I've based these dimensions on the acdc OREL Pro linear luminaire. So that cove lighting is defining the perimeter. When you've got a deep space, it brings people attention to the back of the room. It encourages them to come further into the space. For a smaller room, by framing it, we emphasize the perimeter of the space. It provides a low reflected ambient level of light, but we can control it. We can dim it to suit the needs of the room. Your perimeter graze cove is, as I say, we're using a point source or a linear source, and we're just grazing down that surface. Okay, so we're accentuating the texture, the gradient, the feel, the look of that environment. Again, think about your viewpoint, think about where your drivers are going, make sure we've got access to it. So here, I talked earlier about uplighting. So this is a classic example of incorporating a perimeter cove, so we're uplighting onto the ceiling. Now my main point here really is that we're being squeezed on dimensions all of the time. So by tilting that fitting by 30 degrees, we're getting light up and out into that space. We're getting that soft drop off of light all the way along. Really, really important. We're not just uplighting the ceiling, so it's not going to be too harsh upon that ceiling. We're kicking it out up and along the ceiling. And another point I would raise is just think about your detail. You should be able to see here on the left-hand side the word align. So here what I'm looking to do is align the top of the detail with the top of your luminaire. That will make sure that people aren't able to see your luminaire and that it's out of the way, so we're seeing that lit effect, we're seeing that soft drop-off of light. Another way of uplighting is by where maybe you're not restricted, where you may want to use a Cove luminaire which has an optic. So we're kicking out and we're grazing up that ceiling. So a 30-degree tilt again, you may want it may be less than that, you just need to focus it. So we're grazing light up, and here again, maybe it's about single color, maybe it's about dynamic. And it's not just about color when we're talking about dynamic light. Maybe it's about dynamic white as well. So bring in that dynamic white so that we can change from the daytime to the nighttime scenes as well. Now let's think about the cove. So here, this would be a great example as to where maybe to incorporate that dynamic white environment or that dynamic white alternative. So your slot cove is exactly that, and it's a slot, it's a defined architectural detail. Here I would strongly recommend that you're working with the architects, or working with the contractor to get that crisp lines. Whether it's linear, whether it's curved, it's all about coordination and communication. So you have your luminaire, again, tilted on 30 degrees, so you're getting that light up and out of that slot. So you're defining the route, you're providing a low ambient level of light. What some people also do within the slot is also incorporate downlights. And that way you're keeping your ceiling clean of downlights, and you're incorporating that point source up and into the slot, so that the display, the accent lighting is on whatever is being on display below. So here you've got your cove and you've got your downlights incorporated into one central zone. So you're getting that ceiling feature with the cove, and you're getting that display lighting with the downlights. And the fifth element here is about a vertical cove. Here we're sort of on the barrier of integrated lighting, maybe furniture lighting. But I think it's still worth mentioning that a vertical cove really provides very similar lit effect upon obviously the vertical, that soft drop off. You can see the lit effects on that on the right hand side. It brings that paneling out. Now this is probably more often used in a retail environment, maybe a changing room, where we've got that reflected, diffused light. We're using the surfaces, those matte surfaces. If it's matte white, happy days. Matte white, and we're bouncing the light off those surfaces so that we're modeling the face. We're modeling people when they're looking in the mirror, they're getting that diffused light. It's really, really important. So think about, again, color consistency, color rendering, the quality of how your luminaires are going end to end to ensure there are no shadow gaps. It must, it really should be a consistent lit effect. So before we end, let's look at 5 case studies. I've mentioned this project a little bit already. Golden 27 in Dubai. This is a great example of a bar environment, balancing those layers of light. You've got the chandelier, you've got the integrated light, you've got the cove, the downlights, the feature lighting, and it's about that balance. That cove defines those individual areas. You can see on the image on the left-hand side, the cove is around all 4 sides of those drop-down ceiling elements. It really helps to define those individual areas where you're sat with your friends. It defines the look, the feel, the emotional connection we have with the space. Alternatively here, you've got Into and Lakesides. And if you look at the central image, you can start to see in the ceiling where LDI, the lighting designers in London, have incorporated a linear luminaire, linear cove, and then by doing that, they're washing that architectural detail thereafter. You're creating contrast, you're creating drama, so the cove is actually becoming your feature within the ceiling. And on the same image on the left, you can see the textured pillar. So you've got a halo cove grazing down that pillar, accentuating the detail. And on the left picture, you've then got a backlit ceiling. So here within one single area, you've got 3 different ways of cove and integrated lights combined with direct lighting as well. So this is about providing a feature, providing a continuous lit effect. It's about creating an environment that people are really comfortable within. This is a food court within a shopping mall. And then we go to that warm and cozy space, that hotel suite, where maybe we've got a circular cove, which is really warm, and we're uplighting the ceiling within that environment. Or maybe it's integrated light, and we're really bringing out the texture of the materials and using that warm light to be integrated and grazing up onto the ceiling. So here, this is about a little bit more of the emotional side. It's about controlled lights, daytime, nighttime scenes, of really making that a personal light. And in a similar way, a residential environment. This is not my home, I probably wish it was, but anyway, 2 very different ways of cove lighting. On the left-hand side, you're grazing up that ceiling, providing reflected light to the space below. And on the right-hand side, you have that cinema projection room, where you've got very small cove, and we're integrating the linear source, providing a continuous lit effect, grazing up onto the ceiling. This is a great way of providing that low ambient level of light and a controlled light as well. And then here we have that commercial environment. So you can see on the image on the right-hand side, there's the cove at the very top. So we're uplighting the ceiling. You've got a slot cove, and then on the ground floor and also on the first, you've got a cove around the outside coming down the vertical. So you're using a cove to provide light up onto the ceiling. It's raising our eye line, but at the same time, it's framing, it's providing a focus upon the reception desk as well. So to conclude, what would be my main points? Why do we use a cove? It's low glare, it's integrated. But as well as that, it defines a space, it defines an environment. Make sure that you're speccing a luminaire that is continuous. And by that, I mean, when it's end-to-end, then there are no dark points. It is going end-to-end, it's providing a continuous wash of light. But it's also continuous in terms of color and color consistency. So think about the specification of your LED and the control of your luminaire as well. Do you want it to be dimmable, so you've got that day and nighttime scene? Maybe it's also dynamic white as well. And how? So think about the position. Where's that fitting going to go? Think about the architectural detail. I'm more than happy that we share these slides so that we can provide that level of guidance. But think about the context. Where is the cove? Think about the people that are using that as well. Okay, so think about the viewpoint. Maybe your fitting needs to be on a 30-degree tilt, just to make sure you're getting more light out and you're not losing the light all the way up into the cove. So use that tilt so that we're grazing the light onto the vertical or onto the ceiling. And think about your finish, okay? Think about making sure that it's not a lacquered finish or reflective finish, because you will see the LED source, you'll see whether it's a linear point source, you'll see it, and you may not get that lit effect that you were looking for. So I thank you for your time. If you have to leave us now, thank you for joining us. I think we have time for some questions. So if you do have them, please fire away now, put them in the bottom corner. If you're leaving us now, no problem at all. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to doing another webinar soon for you. Cheers.